Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Black Beauty Activist podcast, where we talk about critical conversations to help Black women in the community be able to increase their level of consciousness, cultural consciousness, as well as self-esteem and confidence. I am your host, Dr. Tameka Ellington. It's been a little while since I've been on here. I've been so busy with other projects. I'm excited to actually tell you all about one of the projects that I've been working on today. But I'm excited. I have an amazing guest on. I'm glad that she said yes when I asked her about being on. We're going to have an amazing conversation today, a conversation that is very much so needed, a conversation that I'm hoping will, get others thinking, and I'm hoping will begin to change some things. That's what this podcast is all about, being activists so that we can make change. And change doesn't happen overnight, as we all know. Change happens in little bitty increments. And if I myself, as the Black beauty activist, if I can make a little bit of a change, then I'm happy. If I can change one person's life, then I'm happy. I feel like I've done my job. But I am here today to talk with you all about diversity in museum studies. And for those of you that don't know me, if this is your first time watching the Black Beauty Activist podcast, I am Dr. Tameka Ellington. I am an empowerment speaker, an educator, an author, and a lover of all things Black culture. And it is my mission to educate, to enlighten, to love, and to help breed confidence in everything that I do. And so whenever you think about walking into any kind of a professional space, any kind of a corporate space, one of the first things you'll notice is the lack of diversity amongst the employees and the administration. In almost every professional discipline, there's a lack of diversity amongst those involved, especially those who have decision-making power. If you see a lot of individuals that are people of color or underrepresented people, a lot of times they are not people who have decision-making power. And so that's the key. We want to make sure that all people that are underrepresented have the opportunity to be in a space where they can also make decisions. But I often ask myself, when I see this and experience this myself, are there not enough people, or not enough underrepresented people to fill positions? Is this something that's happening on a conscious level or unconscious level? I have to ask myself that all the time. Like, is this purposeful? Are people purposefully excluding, or is this something that is very, institutional, something that is just woven into the fabric of the discipline or the industry? I always ask myself that. And if there isn't enough people, then what can we begin to do to train people up so that there can become more people? I often talk about my experiences being the first Black professor of fashion at Kent State, and what that experience was like. There are many underrepresented people who still today are coming into positions where they are the first. Being the first is an amazing experience, but it's also very exhausting in the process. But when you are the first, you have the responsibility to blaze a trail. And so what I'm hoping today, this conversation will help some institutions become the first of whatever it is they are doing, whatever traditions that you've had, to be able to break those traditions and to do something new, to do something more progressive. Being the first is not always easy, but it is so, so worth it. Diversity, equity, and inclusion has always been very important to me. I served as director for diversity initiatives at Kent State University for 3 years, and also served on several Diversity Action Council programs. Diversity has shown up in all the work that I do, whether I'm doing artwork, whether I'm writing books, whether I am making my own fashion or curatorial work. My next guest, she actually met me in the early stages of my first curatorial project that I did with a partner and friend of mine, Dr. Stacy Lim. She and I created an exhibition back in 2016 called Disabled Beauty. Disabled Beauty was a beautiful partnership between Dr. Lim and I because it was all about fashion and disability. Dr. Lim is someone who is a person who's hard of hearing. She wears a cochlear implant and she also wears a hearing device, a hearing aid. And so she and I have been friends for a very long time. And when we both graduated from our PhD programs, we stayed in touch. And once she finished school, we got together and we said we wanted to do something. And we created this exhibition that was a perfect blend of my fashion experience and her experience working with people. She's a speech pathologist, with her experience and also being a heuristic experience, having a heuristic experience about this. So, living with what we quote unquote call a disability. And so Dr. Lim and I put this amazing exhibition together, and she reached out to one of her school friends. And her school friend just so happened to be working at a museum. I don't know if she was director at that particular time. Maybe she was, but she wrote an amazing review for us. And that's how I met her. She came to the exhibition. She, had amazing things to say about it. And it helped us to propel and continue to grow that exhibition. And we not only showed it at Kent State University, but we got a chance to also show it at Central Michigan. And so it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to the executive director of the Massillon Museum. In today's episode, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the dire need of diversity in museum spaces. And before I bring her on, I just want to let all of you all know, one of the things that I admire so much about this person is that she's always been progressive. Ever since I've known her, all the work that she has done, she's so purposeful in the things that she does to help uh, bridge the gap, to help move people along, to help educate others on the importance of diversity. And she does it so flawlessly. It's not even a second thought. And that's what I love the most about her, is that she doesn't have to do any extra things. She just is just doing what she naturally, would want to do, and the partnerships that she would naturally want to have. It's just a beautiful thing. And I'm going to bring her on. Her name is Alex Coon, a good friend of mine, amazing curator and executive director for the Massillon Museum. Thank you, Alex, for being on.
Oh, thank you so much, Tameka. It's such an honor being here.
You're welcome. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to read your bio before we jump into the interview. I want everybody to know a little bit about the amazing contributions that you've made to museum studies and some of the things that you're doing and working on now. I'll ask you about that a little bit later. But Alex Nicholas Coon is executive director for the Massillon Museum and holds a BA in art history from Kent State University and an MA in art history through a joint program at the Cleveland Museum of Art and Case Western Reserve University, and a collections care certificate from the Campbell Center of Historic Preservation. She has been at MassMu since 2001, so 2001, and served as curator from 2003 to 2010. Coon served as board president for the Ohio Museums Association from 2017 to 2019, is immediate past chair for Visit Canton, and is active on boards of the Cleveland Print Room and the Altman Hospital, and holds a membership in the Massillon Rotary and Sir, you have to pronounce this one. Seroptimus International of Canton and Stark County. She has led 3 capital projects for the Massillon Museum, the largest of which was $6.2 million, which was an expansion completed in 2018. She is advocating for museums, and women's and girls is something that's very close to her heart. And she is a girl after my own heart because she loves hunting for vintage clothing, and I love hunting for vintage clothing. Alex is always very sharp in everything that she wears. I love what she wears. And she says that also photography is one of her favorite pastimes. She lives in North Canton with her husband Joshua and twin daughters Persephone and Myra and dog Mustard. That's a cute name for a dog.
It's the first time I've actually heard that out loud in a bio. It's so sweet. A new baby.
All right. So again, Alex, thank you so much for being here. I know you're a busy lady, and we have a guest that's here, and so I know you've been, busy with hosting him around. But thank you so much for taking a little bit of time to talk with me. We're gonna jump right on in, and I would love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into museum studies?
So I have always loved museums, and they've always been for me a place that felt full of inspiration and possibility, and a lot of content that was both beautiful and perhaps intimidating, and about which I wanted to know more all the time. All sorts of museums intrigued me, but of course, growing up in Northeast Ohio, we had the advantage of I was born and raised in Akron, so my hometown museum has always been the Akron Art Museum, which I know holds a special place in your heart too.
Mm-hmm.
Recently had such an incredible exhibition you curated in that space.
Thank you.
And we are in such close proximity to the Cleveland Museum of Art. What a gift. What an immense gift. And having had the opportunity to regularly visit those spaces, I think perhaps I took for granted that all communities had access to spaces containing as rich and full collections. Of course, I didn't know at the time the whole history of Northeast Ohio's industrial era and how a lot of that wealth generated our ability to have museums of that stature. But my parents, thankfully, valued what museums had to offer for young people. And so we visited.
You start going when you were a young girl?
Oh, yes. When I was just a very young girl, I can remember the Akron Art Museum, the pink queue when it was outside in the courtyard. And I can remember our trips to the downtown Akron Summit County Public Library always included passing by the Akron Art Museum and oftentimes stopping in. And so it was just part of my upbringing. I was so fortunate. And school field trips, which then were something we now take for granted, unfortunately, were then pretty abundant, at least for me growing up. And so we had frequent opportunity to visit Cleveland Museum of Art, Cleveland Museum of Natural History. And as I started recognizing that my father was a musician and is a musician, so I had exposure to art in that form, but I always gravitated toward it and to people who also were drawn to art. If you're someone who maybe, I don't want to say has trouble fitting in, but feels as though there's an alternate need of expression that isn't being met by maybe traditional, paths that kids might take. Art posed for me, as it did for a lot of my friends and colleagues and a lot of artists, an outlet for expressing that creativity and finding like-minded people and exploring, sort of challenging topics that are hard to suss out verbally and maybe in the circles you're accustomed to being part of. And so, I don't know, I just always gravitated toward art and art making. I was always frustrated that I wasn't as skilled as a lot of my friends were in the art making space, but I pursued it relentlessly nonetheless. And so when I hit 7th grade and encountered this teacher who embodied everything I'd felt an artist and an art teacher should be, and someone with whom I have a professional relationship today, I'm so fortunate. She's still a practicing artist, Shirley N.D. Sachs. She's an amazing collage artist. So she was my 7th grade art teacher. And I've then had the chance to work with her in the professional sphere. So as teachers saw things in me or recognized that I just gravitated toward art, it just became the place where I felt safe and where I felt most of myself. And so I was naturally inclined to pursue a career in the arts. And I didn't actually remember that I always wanted to work in a museum and aspire to be a curator until I went back and I read some of my journals from high school.
Mm,
And sophomore year, one of my journals stated that my career dream was to be a curator.
really?
Yes. Hmm.
Wow.
But I was diverted from that path because, family members sometimes don't see the, don't recognize that a passion can be translated into a career.
Absolutely.
And so they always encouraged my participation in art. There was also this great program called Art Explorers,
Hmm.
which was facilitated by the Scouts. And they went in those assessments that you take, those career assessments as kids, where you bubble in
Yeah.
all these different facets of your personality. It spits out some professional tracks that might be of interest to you. And for me, it was the arts and medicine. Um, and interestingly, Stacy Lim, Dr. Lim, who you referenced earlier, she and I had the most amazing science teacher in seventh grade, and she and I sat next to each other the whole year. And I think his enthusiasm and passion and the magic he brought to the classroom inspired me to pursue the arts. So I think medical profession
Hmm.
at one point in time. So the people you meet and you encounter, if you're a sponge and you're willing to be open to these opportunities and their passion translates, it really can open you up to all these amazing considerations. And so anyways, there are these opportunities. Then they match you with a
Yeah.
career and an interest. And then they invite you to be parts of these groups. There was medical explorers and there were art explorers.
Wow.
And so I joined both. And medical explorers, I think after our visit to the coroner's office, I sort of gravitated away from medical explorers, as fascinating as it was. I thought, I think I would devote my time elsewhere. Um, and actually, in art explorers, the hub was the Akron Art Museum, and the two facilitators were artists. One of whom you might know, Michael Lauderstadt. He was
Okay.
a professor at Kent.
Hmm.
So these angsty high school kids, of which I was one, we had the opportunity to, with those volunteers through the Akron Art Museum at the time, take trips to the Cleveland Museum of Art, met with Derek Hess in his studio, drew from the live model,
Mm,
visited graphic designers, explored all these careers in the arts. I was just hooked. That was it for me. I started to better understand this world of museums was a launch pad for connecting with artists in all these various forms. And I never looked back. I wove in and out at Kent State University, um, here and there through fashion merchandising and through
mhm.
journalism. Other art forms, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's other,
Absolutely.
um, but I was a rebel, and against my parents' will, I majored in art history, and then I stayed on that path. And I was fortunate that through an internship, here comes the Akron Art Museum again, a summer internship where I was working in the education department at the Akron Art Museum,
Mm,
put me in touch with my senior year at Kent, an artist who was teaching art classes at the Massillon Museum. And she knew,
wow.
yeah, and she knew I was pursuing graduate school and had taken the um, the what is it, the GRE? Gosh, no, not the GRE. What is it? What did we have to take to get into graduate school?
GRE.
Is it the GRE? Okay.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I was looking for internship opportunities, and she said, the Massillon Museum's a pretty cool museum. I'd never heard of it. I'd never been to Massillon.
Yeah.
I applied and for an educational internship, and in August 2001, they granted it to me. And um, the more I delved into the world of museums in all its facets, from collections work now to administration and fundraising and development and sustainability, and the work on maintaining inclusive environments that reflect our communities, the more passionate I grew and grew. And I think
Mm,
the beauty about museums, if you allow yourself and you're in a position where you can impact some of this change, activate it, like you mentioned earlier, you realize that a museum space is ever evolving. There are
Mhm.
endless possibilities. It doesn't have to be a stagnant, stale place. And so that attracted me too, much like the wide array of vintage clothing that's out there and at our disposal. There's no end to the wonderful things we can find. And so I think that is true also of museums and the way we program them.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
long answer, I'm sorry, but that's my whole.
That's okay. Yeah, yeah. Well, you said something that as you were speaking, one of the things that came to my mind was thinking about my experience as a young girl. Drawing was always something that was very important to me. And like you said, it was like your escape. It was my escape. I grew up in the inner city of Cleveland, very poor background. My mom she was a single mom. She was 16 when she had me. And so growing up in that space, drawing was something that kept me out of trouble
Mm.
for sure. And when I'm thinking about the fact that you were able to have the experience of being able to have access to these different museums. And one of the things that I want to definitely preface is that you were blessed.
I was privileged.
You were blessed to be able to have access because
Mhm.
even though I lived right off of 105th and St. Clair, which, as you know, is very close in proximity to the Cleveland Museum of Art.
Yeah.
Do you know I didn't even go there until I was an adult?
Is that right? Not even on a school field trip.
Maybe, our school field trips typically were not the museum. They would take us to the zoo. They might take us. I remember one time we went to the symphony. That was like
Mhm.
the biggest one. But I don't recall us ever going to the museum.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. So my first experience at the Cleveland Art Museum was when I became an adult. Isn't that
Wow.
interesting?
It is. I think it's we're making so many more strides through granting and funding programs to make access
Hmm.
um, to make it essential.
Yeah.
And as we know, there are still barriers to field trips, financial scheduling
Mhm.
conflicts. There are all these barricades to making it convenient.
Yeah.
And museums are really trying to combat that, but it's still a struggle. And I think we oftentimes take for granted those things which are in our backyard. But if you didn't grow up in a culture of attending museums
Right. Right.
or attending the symphony or whatever that culture might be, cooking in the home
Yeah.
or um, whatever, sports. I mean, my family never had football on Sundays. It wasn't until I started dating my now husband that Sundays became devoted to football, which
Sports.
his
Yeah.
family cannot fathom.
Hmm.
Ours was devoted to music listening, and then at the end of the evening, Star Trek and The Simpsons. It was like a very different culture. Um, so if you don't grow up with exposure, um,
Hmm.
it's it's hard to really
Yep.
initiate a new, culture of doing so.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was actually the only artist in my family.
Wow.
And so my brother has a daughter who now has shown some great interest in art, and she actually just got accepted to the Cleveland School of the Arts.
That's
Yeah,
exciting.
and so now I have an artist in my family, which is amazing.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, but um, access is everything. Access is everything.
Mhm.
And so you've always been so progressive in your approach to expanding your audience's ideas about what art is and the people that produce art. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to inclusion with curation?
Sure. So I'm fortunate that, and I think Massillon Museum, where I've been for 23 years now, and where I've had the benefit of growing, and then having attended Case with all classes and my library access being that of the Cleveland Museum of Art, that being my classroom. I had the opportunity to understand the difference between a small to mid-size museum and a big museum. So, right. So Cleveland Museum of Art would be a large museum,
Right.
Maybe not as large as the Met, but a
Right.
big museum.
Right.
Massillon Museum was considered a small, and now we're considered a medium-sized museum, small to mid, based on literally our footprint and the budget size. So I had the opportunity to witness at the Massillon Museum what it means when there's not as much red tape. And so the ability to, the ability to have your hands in so many different facets and some layers of obstruction, or I guess I never really viewed them as obstruction, but for many institutions, as you and I have discussed, they are.
Yeah.
But there not being that many layers within the decision-making process.
Yeah.
Things can move more quickly.
Yeah.
Decisions can be made more easily. And when you're not beholden to the high stakes that come with large scale donors, and I'm not saying that we don't have very, very generous philanthropic supporters, but our budget level is much different than a Cleveland Museum of Art, let's say. So, and the nature of our board is one that is a working board. So they are volunteers. They dig in. They meet every month. Decisions need to filter through the board. And we are the only museum in the state of Ohio currently funded by a city property tax levy.
Wow.
Yep. Which means every 5 years we go to the voters and we ask them to support the museum with their tax dollars. What that means is that we are accountable to the citizens of Massillon, and we must reflect our constituents. We are a private museum. We are not a municipal museum. We are a nonprofit that we govern ourselves. But the largest source of funding, 70% of our funding, is generated by homeowners in Massillon.
Wow.
Those can be, those can be homeowners, who have $50,000 homes, $100,000 homes, $1 million homes. Everyone contributes to sustaining its museum. And therefore, there's a level of transparency we maintain and an accountability. We own a responsibility to both reflect the community, its makeup, its interests, but also the responsibility to, as you referenced in your earlier comments, introductory comments, to lead and to expose them, right, to new ideas and concepts and the world outside Massillon, Ohio, or Stark County. We bear that responsibility. And museums they aren't all, and they were not always, these safe spaces where hard conversations can happen.
Yeah.
In a way that is meant to be both accessible and approachable. So we cling to that at the museum. We cling to that belief that people have. And thankfully, something like the American Alliance of Museums, when we were in Washington, D.C., which my colleague Scott and I do every year to meet with members of Congress and advocate for the issues that are important to our field. It's something like 97% of Americans believe, and these are American, these are across the board. These aren't just museum lovers. These are samples of Americans in a higher sample set than a lot of studies utilize. 97% of Americans trust museums. They believe in the power of museums and that they're good for business, good for people, good for quality of life. Now, that having been said, it doesn't mean they don't think that we have work to do. Absolutely. But generally speaking, right, and we know there's work to do, but generally speaking, people feel museums are, generally speaking, trustworthy places you can go for information that's accurate, relevant, inspiring, and educational. So we leverage that belief that people have and we consistently deliver information with the idea that we are we have to continue to earn and maintain the public trust. And with that bears the responsibility of, as I said, being open, honest, transparent, and vulnerable, and open-minded.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think so. I think that we have an advantage being a smaller museum.
Yeah.
We don't have the bureaucracy, and I don't have to worry with our board and the very democratic process that comes within the mutual respect
Yeah.
that happens, and the role they have in hiring. They have to approve all hires. They have to approve the posting of job descriptions, the salary. So it's not Alex Coon
Yeah.
hiring her friends, right? And bypassing qualifications. It is a rigorous process that has board and staff involvement. And oftentimes people ask, oh, doesn't that bother you? Don't you feel like you're being micromanaged? And I say, no, I gain oftentimes insight that I maybe hadn't considered. And it makes it so that we all have had open dialogue
Yeah.
about, whether it's the exhibits that we rent or the collections that come into our care or the people we hire.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that barriers to inclusion oftentimes are bureaucratic. I don't know
Wow.
that I actually got to the heart of what you.
Yeah.
I think that's one major barricade is that there are all these people. It becomes very political.
Yeah. Yeah.
Often, right?
Wow. Okay, let's just get into that. What
Yeah,
exactly does
totally.
that mean? So, in regards to politics in museum spaces, for people that don't work in museums, can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Sure. I think for many years, museums have been about a person's vision, a
Yeah.
person's palette for art, or a person's perspective on history or narrative. Um, if I'm going to, maybe 50 years ago, if there's an exhibition about um, um, your work, let's just say, Dr. Ellington, as an author, as a speaker, as um, uh, you know, a, a fashionista, because you
Mhm.
always look amazing. If I'm going to have this biographical sketch of you, there would be no question. I would be writing it. I would be the person who would be setting the standard. I'm not talking about me, Alex Coon.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
talking
Yeah.
about, right? Um, there wouldn't have been thought given to inviting you to actually share your narrative and
Right.
share your story and hear the first person perspective. There would be a narrative that I wanted to project, and I would make the pieces fit to make the narrative work. I mean, that's the way history has been for many, many, many years, and museums just followed suit with this very Western. So breaking from the tradition of that has been a very politicized thing because there's funding attached to certain perspectives, and that has driven really a lot of decisions that I think, curatorially speaking, museums have made over the years. Then there's this idea of marginalized groups of
Yeah.
artists, right? If we're talking about art museums, so it's
Yeah.
women, people of color, people with disabilities, and anyone considered other. Um, and so oftentimes museums were very, very much staying in the lane of the status quo. And because there wasn't a lot of work being done on, or representation from within those communities to interpret the work, um,
Mm.
the the collection of certain types of materials, be they Native American artifacts or white male artists, it continued on because those underrepresented communities never had voice in museums. So museums have come to be known as these things that people trust and they love, and the things that people grew up with and they have fond memories of, and attachments to, and there's a lot of sentimentality wrapped up. To break the mold of what someone thinks their community museum or this museum is a very scary thing to people who feel like they can stand to lose funders
Mm.
um, and be politicized for decisions they make. So for the most part, Tameka, I think honestly, it's It's fear of not, um, coming under fire for really combating an institutional way of thinking. And oftentimes museums, they're nonprofit entities, right? So they're under resourced and they're understaffed, and they get scared about losing, access to their resources or their staff. So, but also I think it's just because people have been really ignorant and undereducated for a long time about, you know, um, about, the canon, the art historical canon, the fashion history canon,
Yeah.
um, the history books. Um, they're very, they included certain perspectives, and, they didn't highlight marginalized communities. And so it's just, I think museums are that we're certainly having dialogue about it at conferences. There are lots of entities devoted to the diversity, accessibility, inclusion work, but and I think people are finally realizing that resistance to change is going to leave them irrelevant. But
Mm.
I think for a long time it was fear,
Yeah.
and ignorance about
Mhm.
how to pivot in a way that wouldn't result in losing funding. Sadly, I think that was a lot of it. I don't think you asked a wonderful question at the beginning. Why is there, I can't remember exactly how you posed it, but you're asking, why is it that we have a lack of,
Right.
is it purposeful, right? Is it purposefully
Right.
exclusionary?
Right.
I would like to believe that it's not. Certainly there are instances where we know
Hmm.
it is. I can't unpack that. But I think a lot of times it's that, honestly, people don't want to do the work.
That is okay. You said two things that I want to flesh out a little bit. You said fear is one of the main things. And if we think about what racism, what lacking in diversity is, it really is this essence of fear
Mm-hmm.
surrounding everything, either fear of that you're going to be losing some kind of control,
Mm-hmm.
fear that you may say the wrong thing, fear that I was last over the weekend. I was in Columbus at the Ohio Anna Book Fest. Excuse me. My book was one of the featured books there,
I
and we
saw.
had
That's amazing. Congratulations.
thanks, and we had a panel discussion, and we were talking about social justice issues in authorship. And this woman, a white woman who was in the audience, asked me particularly, what can white people do to support Black people? The
In
in,
general, in general, is that, I mean, was that the question? Just in general? Okay.
the people in the room, they were just like the white people, like they were in shock that that person even asked. But the what I told her was that it's important that you always be supportive and that you always come at, no matter who the person is, with love, that you always come at that person with love. I said people know when you don't care for them. It's easy to sense that, right? But as long as you come at it with love, and as long as you come at it with authenticity, that's all that you should do. And I said, and if you see something happening, say something. One of the worst things that you can do is to be quiet.
Yes.
That's one of the worst things you can do. And in regards to that, people don't talk up because they are fearful.
Mhm.
So, fear of losing funding, fear that you may, piss off some board member or whatever the case might be, right? We have to, and I have a hard time with that because um, I try my best not to live in fear in anything that I do.
Mhm.
And it bothers me so much when I see people living their life in fear.
I I agree with you, and I think a couple things I've come to realize. There are people who have at some point in time they've decided, like you and I have decided,
Hmm.
we're not going to live that way.
Yeah.
Whether it happened, whether it was a decision that we made when we were kids, or came with a traumatic event, or a wake up call of some kind, or it was really intentional on this this trajectory of growth, whatever the case may be. And I think it's important to surround yourself with people who challenge you in really healthy ways, people from whom you can learn, and you have a lot to learn, and that you admit that you have a lot to learn, and you don't think you know everything.
Yeah.
And you leave your ego at the door. I think people confuse ego and confidence, right?
Yep.
You are a very confident woman and author and educator, and you're facilitating this conversation, and we're both vulnerable in this space, right? We're live. I checked on, I'm like, oh, it's live. I've really got to make sure I have my game on. I know Tameka's lighting's going to be perfect. Oh my gosh. I have to make sure that my background's doesn't have this Barbie dream house in the background. I've got to make right. But I knew when I came in the space, I'd feel comfortable because you're here. And I trust you, and this is a great space. But we're confident. We're not egotistical. We are proud of the things we've done, and we're not afraid to share them.
Absolutely.
And from the platforms that we have, it doesn't mean we're egotistical. So I think people, so there's people who don't want to live in fear, and who feel like they can say something. And you and I are those people. But at the same time, I feel, and I know you do too, it's our responsibility, in the same way that you treated that woman's question with grace, because she put herself in a very vulnerable position to ask a question that she very genuinely could have been asking, and probably really meant, what can we do? Okay, so she hasn't done the work yet. She doesn't have these conversations in other spaces.
Right.
And you made her feel safe and inspired to ask it. When people ask those questions like that in those spaces, it's important we are gentle and extend grace and say, okay, what you told her, but also, and here's what you can do. And here's a book you should read. Right. And here's an exhibit you should see. And so I think we have to relearn. I mean, during the height of I don't like saying through COVID, because obviously it's still here. So during the height of the pandemic, during the advent of exposure to George Floyd, and in the world that will forever be impacted by it, because there's a George Floyd era, there is this thing that happened that perpetuated this thing, undercurrent that we knew existed. And then it is a part of our history, and it is a thing from which we all need to learn. But at the height of our realization that with our being confronted with this in a way that was forcing everybody to talk, people were shocked at what they had to learn. But there's also this environment of support, and people wanting to help, people of color wanting to help other people of color understand, people, who are white, learning how to ask questions and find resources, and better understand how to have a narrative in a place that was productive and progressive.
Right.
And wasn't checking a box. So I think when you surround yourself with people with whom you can have these conversations, and they're gracious, in spite of all they bring with them, and you surround yourself with people who inspire you, and with people in leadership, our board members, for example, who respect, there's an environment of mutual respect, and staff members who want to do the work and have the conversations and understand how we can do a better job. Making members of the Black community feel comfortable in the Massillon Museum.
Right.
What do we have to do to back it up so that if Alex Coon isn't there, all this work we've done, there's a statement. We have a statement of intention on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. We worked hard over a period of almost a year with our board members, with the chair of our board, who's a Black woman, with our staff members. We worked hard, and then we passed a resolution as a board that we would own this statement, that it would live on our website, but we would actively practice and actively go back and say, you know what, boy, we said we wanted to have greater representation Black artists in our collection. We haven't really done a great job of that. Maybe adding them, buying artwork to the collection. And guess what? We also can't expect that we're just going to rely on gifts from the community anymore.
Right.
Nor should we expect that artists are going to donate, right?
Yep.
We need to also do the work of supporting the artists, without whom we'd have no museums, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So we can't just profit off of these individuals. We need to actively engage in reciprocal, productive, beautiful, respectful relationships. So it's about surrounding yourself with people who can have those conversations.
Yeah.
And that's the first step. And so we've worked really hard to build a board. It's not just so-and-so who's head of whatever.
Yeah.
So-and-so can give X number of dollars. It's
right.
Guess what? I've vetted this person. We've had one-on-one interviews. They represent this area of expertise. They will be respectful in meetings. We have a lot to learn from them. They want to learn about us, and they show up.
Yeah.
Right. And so we carefully select our our board members. It is diverse in many ways. And that representation and leadership is one of the first steps, I feel, making sure your board is informed, engaged, diverse in many ways.
Yeah.
And that you can have these hard conversations and nobody has to feel scared for their jobs or.
Yes. Now, not only are you progressive, but the entire institution of the Massillon Museum is progressive. And so one of the things that I wanted to, of course, mention is, from my understanding, the Greatness Cafe, owned by Cyrus Assar, is one of the first Black businesses in downtown Massillon. Can you talk a little bit about how that partnership came to be?
Yes, Cyrus and I have been friends for many years. When he was a musician in his former life, and we met during one of the Rhythms concerts. And this is live, so I can mention we have a Rhythms concert tomorrow night, right, at the Massillon Museum. He performed, and we clicked, and we stayed in touch. At the time, he was living in Los Angeles. Well, he was living around this area, but shortly thereafter moved to LA. And we maintained a friendship. I went out to Los Angeles in 2019, October, right before the world changed this time around. It'll keep changing forever. We always have to be ready for it. But I went out there, and because I was heading out there, we arranged to meet up.
Yeah.
And during that time, he shared with me his idea for, I'd known that he was interested in healthy, educating people about what they put in their bodies and how to lead a healthy lifestyle. And he was really interested in food as a source of, so many facets of our mental health when we put the right things in our body. So I was always really interested in that. Don't always practice what he was putting out there, but I was always tried to educate myself. So we met up, and he told me about this concept. He said, boy, if I ever come back to Massillon, he said, which I've been researching and I tend to do, I want to bring some of the philosophies I've learned here about the food business in LA to Massillon, because it's lacking in diversity of access to organic ingredients and so forth. So he told me about this idea he had for blending that method with mental health. And I told him, I said, well, just so happens that our current cafe owner, I'm not sure they're going to renew the lease. I'm not sure, but if and when, let's get in touch. So sure enough, the world changed in early 2020. Our then cafe tenants didn't survive the shutdown as a business. Yeah. And this opportunity presented itself. I contacted Cyrus right away, and I said, hey, if you're really serious about this, let's have a conversation. I would love to explore the possibility, because I think so. Also, the murder of George Floyd had happened. There's a lot of conversation online, on social media. Of course, the whole world is ignited around this and other injustices against Black people in our country. And I didn't think anything of sharing my frustration and and anger and support of the Black community on social media. It wasn't even a thought to share a post or express a feeling or tell my friends on social media how I was communicating this to my daughters or how we were documenting it at the museum. And Cyrus says to me, "You're and I'm not saying that I'm just sharing the story because it shocked me, not because
Yeah.
He said, "You're the first white friend I've had who is actively um, speaking out on social media against George Floyd, actively trying to, against the atrocity of the murder,
Yeah.
and actively in saying Black Lives Matter, using it as a hashtag, sharing resources that I share." And I said, "That's ridiculous. That can't be true." He said, "No, it's true." And here we go back to fear, right? Possibly. What will my friends think? What will my neighbors think? This is a conflict I don't want to get in the middle of or something. Certainly there's some topics that feel that way. They feel gray and they feel muddy and maybe you're not really sure. This is very clear. This is very clear. So I didn't even think anything of it. But that started he and I having a lot of serious conversations about how the cafe could be a purposeful, intentional way to place representation of a person of color on Main Street. Because then he started telling me all these things I never knew. I'd been at the Massillon Museum at that point for 20 years.
Yeah.
Okay. I had never driven, this is ridiculous, but it is the truth. I had never driven south a mile to an area, Shriver Park, in the residential neighborhood that's a predominantly Black neighborhood. I had never had occasion to drive through the residential neighborhood. Why? There are no resources there. There's no grocery store down there. It is all residential. And why had we not seen many members from those neighborhoods and communities walking? It's within walking distance to the Massillon Museum. They weren't seeing themselves represented in the museum. And also, Cyrus said, for many, many years, there'd been this very, very blatant lack of acceptance of seeing people of color walking downtown and on Main Street. So here I am, shocked. I shouldn't have been shocked. But he was just expressly telling me truths that members of the Black community had known their whole lives growing up in Massillon. And here I am, sheltered, facing Main Street in downtown, facing north, never very engaged in the community, in the schools, and with a lot of different organizations that I was. So he and I started having just really intentional conversations about how to break all those preconceived notions of what the museum could be to the community and how he could help be a conduit and how together we could help set a precedent.
Yeah.
And so it was very intentional. At the same time, he had a great product.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. He does a great job.
Yeah.
He's really, really creative and smart, and he's a great marketer. So it really worked out well, but it was, and the board all understood the benefits. The board, we had conversations that said, we will diversify the audience of the museum. We will become more welcoming.
Yeah.
This, to many people who hadn't entered the museum, this could be a very imposing structure. What we think of as a welcoming, warm place once you get inside.
Right.
But it means so many different things to other people. So it was just very intentional about engaging Cyrus. I mean, it wasn't intentional that we wanted to work together. Any opportunity we had to bring him in to speak or for he and I to talk or connect when I was in LA or him, he always saw us when he came to town. He always came to the island party or we'd put him in front of kids because he's such a great speaker. But this was a very intentional thing. And the board got behind it 100%. We needed a cafe. We believed in his product. We trusted Cyrus. We knew that it would be the beginning of a really wonderful new chapter, and it would set an example and break a lot of stigma. So
yeah. And what we love about you, and here's me speaking for Cyrus. Basically, what I'm trying to get at is what he expressed to you about you being the only white friend who's actually doing something. What we appreciate about you is that you're not a performative ally, is that you're serious about the things that come out of your mouth and the things that you say, the things that you write, and you actually put action behind it. Because there is so much performative, things happening. Like people will say things, they'll write things, but then they won't put action behind it. They won't put money towards it, And so, have you, what can you say about those things? Like for those institutions that are still struggling because the leadership hasn't been for it, or the board, or whatever the case might be, has not been for that, and it's the community is seeing it as performative because nothing's happening, right? So what can you advise, them to do, or what can they, what can they do?
Bring people of color, marginalized communities, diverse perspectives onto your board, onto your team, advisory boards, in partnership, programmatically.
Yeah.
The links, for example, that
Yeah.
wonderful relationship we've sustained with the links, the Kent area chapter, has expanded our horizon, our knowledge, our understanding of the world, as their program says, through the eyes of the 21st century African American child. Beautiful. That is not me, right? That is a huge part of our population, a 21st century African American child. Inviting that perspective through the lens, literally, of photography, in the case of this partnership, affords us an opportunity to see what it's like from the perspective of a kid in that community. Not representative of every Black child, of course, just like the student artwork we have in any given show is not the experience of every child. It's of that. But it is purposeful, again, in giving these underrepresented communities an opportunity to have a voice and have a place in a space that for many years has alienated them for whatever reason, because they haven't felt comfortable, because they've had a bad experience, because they just didn't feel it was something, of interest to them. And so the links have the same goal, creating a new generation of art lovers, photographers, creative individuals, museum patrons, museum curators, museum directors. If we don't start purposefully inserting people into spaces where they've largely been absent, if you can't seed, you have to plant seeds. And it starts with being open-minded, and it starts with, it absolutely starts with leaving your ego at the door.
Absolutely.
Saying, right, this is not Alex Coon's museum.
Absolutely.
It's not anyone's museum. This is the public's museum. And I have to say, all our staff members, we've all learned from and taught one another. There are, when you have different generations on a staff as well, that's important. That's important, because I learn a lot from younger generations, and you have to be very receptive and open-minded as we all become aware of generationally perpetuated stereotypes, terminology, manners of behavior. If someone doesn't respect you enough to tell you, that's really not okay to say, and if you as a leader don't listen, you're doing yourself a disservice, right?
Absolutely.
So we foster. So the other thing you can do is foster a space in which employees feel comfortable, staff feel comfortable expressing to you the way they think that a diverse and inclusive culture looks like, and that you are accepting of that when it's all done in an environment of mutual respect, of course. And you also feel comfortable making sure, hey, that becomes part of the culture. Because like with accessibility, when we first had an exhibition that focused on blindness and incorporated blind artists in 2017, that was our first dipping our toe in the water of purposeful accessibility
Wow.
initiative, and now we have a very active accessibility committee made of staff, museum, the board, community members. There is no thought to, as you know from working with us in the exhibit, high contrast text. Museums, we like to play with things that look
Mm-hmm.
cool and are artistically designed. They're not always legible or
Right.
accessible.
Right.
Finding that medium where you're maintaining those, those tenets of accessibility and continually doing it, setting the standards, making sure this is the template you use, this is the template, so that it becomes ingrained in part of the culture. And you have
Yeah.
to do the same thing with the people you consistently have at the table. Whenever we have jurors for our Stark County Artist exhibition, it's an annual jury show. It's been going on for decades. When I first started at the museum, there was only one juror at a time. So it was really one person's
Opinion. Yeah.
opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So when I started managing the exhibit, the first thing I did was say, we need 3 people, because what happens is
Mm-hmm.
even with 2, people start bartering.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll let that in if you can live with this. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so 3 people, a mix of gender, color, age, profession, area of expertise. Those are active decisions. Those are things people can do. If people are afraid of sweeping change, or they don't think you said something earlier too, it's a slow build. It
Mm-hmm.
takes time to build relationships and trust. But the more people you bring into your world, the more people you invite in, the richer the experience, and the more diverse people,
Yeah.
the more trust you'll garner. And so I think a really easy way is through board placement, advisory committee, and then if you have a jury in an adjudicated or situation, and reach out, don't just pick people, ask people to recommend
Mm-hmm.
individuals who would bring diverse perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't
There
have
you
to
go.
be, we're going to buy a Kahinde Wiley, which actually
Right.
most museums couldn't touch the price of his amazing work. That's great. Do that all day long if you can afford it. But
Right.
it can be, as simple as seeking volunteers through a connection, sending a letter to a predominantly Black church,
Mm-hmm.
and letting them know you're seeking, volunteers, or asking if they have initiatives you can support.
Right.
It's reaching across,
Yeah.
it's
So
reaching.
you guys heard it. So museums, art institutions, the way that you can start the process of becoming more diverse in your practice is by weaving it into the culture on
Yes.
all levels. And that is not hard to do.
Yep.
It doesn't take a lot of thought. And I think that's part of what people I've heard. Me being on lots of different diversity committees and things, people will just say, "Oh, that just sounds like so much work."
Mm,
But even if it is a lot of work, isn't it worth it?
it is.
It's worth it.
It is
It's
work, but not work in the sense that it's work.
right,
It's practice, just like
right,
anything. If you can't say, I want to fit into that dress next week or next month or in 6 months, I'm going on vacation in the Bahamas and I want to wear that bathing suit or whatever. You can't expect that you're going to look the way you want to look
right,
if
right,
you do nothing different.
right, right.
You got to work. You got to change something.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alex. This has been a beautiful conversation. I appreciate it so much. I appreciate your authenticity. I appreciate just the person that you are because, as I said before, I've always admired the museum and everything that you guys have done and how purposeful you've always been with making sure that the museum's programming, everything is very diverse. But I would like to ask, how can people stay connected? If anybody wants to maybe become a member of the museum, what can they do?
Thank you. MassillonMuseum.org and any of our social media platforms at MassMu is our Instagram handle. We're always happy to take a call from the museum. Our website, again, MassillonMuseum.org, has a host of information about how you can become a member, volunteer. Our contact information, our photos are all online as well. Our previous annual reports, if you really want to dig in. So just come in and grab a smoothie at Greatness Cafe and come in and see the beautiful exhibition that you've curated. I know, Tameka, you will spend more time with others on your podcast talking extensively about the amazing exhibition that is Home Again, the embodiment of Africa through art and fabric. But I have to say, it is one of the most beautiful exhibitions produced at the Massillon Museum in my time there. I say that hands down, and it is one of the most awe-inspiring and well received. It's just been a joy to have that and to connect so many great, important conversations like this one to it. So thank you for the work you do. And everyone should come see it before May 9th.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alex. I won't keep you any longer, but I just want to say thank you again for spending some time with me this evening. And thank you for everything that you do.
Oh, thank you. I'm a huge fan of yours as well. Lots of mutual love. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too.
All right, everybody. So this is the part of the show where I like to give some references. I'm an educator, scholar. I think it's really important that no matter what topic I'm talking about, that I give some extra information that my audience can use to dive deeper into the topics that we're talking about. These are not just topics that are in relation to what Dr. Tameka wants to hear. These are topics that are impacting people across the world. And so this idea of museums being having issues with the lack of diversity is something that's been studied even in research. And so I wanted to provide you all with a research article that you can use. It's called Exhibiting Inclusion and Examination of Race, Ethnicity, and Museum Participation by Alexandra Olivares and Jacqueline Piatak. I think that's how you pronounce her last name, Piatak. But these women have created an amazing article, research-based article, where they collected some data to find out what museums can actually do to involve more inclusion in what their practices are. So if you want to dive more into this topic of inclusion in art spaces, I recommend that you pick up this article. And as Alex mentioned, I have a show. I have the privilege of working with the Massillon Museum on a show called Home Again, the Embodiment of Africa through Art and Fabric. It was funded through the National Endowment of the Arts Big Read program. The Big Read is a program that the NEA has been doing for many years. The purpose of the program is to involve the community in the learning process and literature, as well as weaving in art in the process. And so the Massillon Museum has been in partnership with the NEA Big Read for several years now. And the book that they chose this year is called Homegoing by Ya Gayasi, and she's a Ghanaian American author. The story is a beautiful story. And when Alex asked me to curate the show, she gave me a copy of the book. I read the book in probably 2 days because I loved it so much. And as soon as I read the book, I knew exactly what I wanted to do for the show. And I hope that you all, if you're in the area, that you will go and see it. If you want to travel, maybe make a one tank trip up to Massillon Museum to take a look at the show, please do so. I would love to hear your thoughts about it. Love to hear what you learned and just how much you enjoyed. But thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please like it and leave a comment on YouTube. Share it with those in your circle who you know will benefit. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, the Black Beauty Activist Podcast. And remember, always remember, on the other side of fear is your beautiful confidence. Have a wonderful night, everybody.